He found an alien woman covered in mud. No clothes, no hope. Until he chose to help. Rain hit the ground like falling knives. It carved into the sludge, carving rivers through the ruins of HFY, peeling rust off long-dead metal like skin. Niven moved slowly through the wreckage, boots squelching in the ash-soaked soil, head down, jaw locked. He was already soaked to the bone, the storm flattening his hood to his scalp. The cold bit through his gear with a spite that felt personal. He should not have been here, not in this sector, not near the crater ridge, and certainly not alone. The terrain was unstable, prone to sinkholes and silent collapses. And yet, he returned every few days, like a man revisiting the grave of someone he couldn't let go. Once Kareth, 5 had been a sanctuary, a triage moon, a place where the broken and dying were meant to find relief. Now it was bones and rust and lies. He was prying open a twisted medevac crate with a half-broken crowbar when he heard it. Not a voice, not a call, just a sound, a breath, wet, shivering, not wind, not machine, alive. Niven froze, eyes lifting slowly toward the tree line, where the crater dipped into the fog-draped ruin of a buried ship hull. At first, he saw only mud. The whole slope was smeared in it, thick, blackened sludge like blood diluted in ash. But something shifted. Barely. A twitch. A ripple. Then he saw her. She lay at the crater's edge like something the earth was trying to swallow. Naked, coated in wet mud from neck to ankle, her body half submerged in the runoff. Slender limbs folded tight against her chest. Her skin, where it peeked through the muck, was the color of new moss, green, sickly but smooth. Her ribs showed sharply beneath the grime. Bruises painted her arms and thighs in 6 shades of violet and blue-black, rain streaming down her body in rivulets. Her hair, long, soaked, unnaturally yellow, hung in ropes across her face and shoulders, tangled with sticks and crushed leaves. It didn't look like it belonged to her. It looked stolen from another life. She didn't move until his boots squelched closer. Then she flinched, not like a startled animal, but like a person who knew exactly what came next. Her breath hitched. Her arms tightened. Her eyes cracked open just enough to show a pair of slitted amber irises, wide, terrified, and dull with exhaustion. Niven stopped. His instinct screamed, not just because she was alien, not because she was naked, or because the mud clung to her like a burial shroud, but because she had been discarded, not left behind by accident, thrown away. He'd seen the signs before, on bodies, in footage during tribunal hearings. Faint scarring along the abdomen, micro-tag ports at the base of the neck, a line of surgical dots curving beneath one hip. Tags, control ports, fertility conditioning marks. She was one of them, one of the women they'd used, and she had no reason to trust him. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly, raising both hands, voice hoarse from cold and silence. "You're not in a facility. You're safe now." Her reaction was barely perceptible, a twitch, a shallow breath, but it told him everything. She didn't believe him. She expected pain, not rescue. Niven knelt slowly, every movement careful. "I'm going to put something down. Just my coat. No touching. I promise." He stripped off his jacket, thick, weathered fiber, patched with sealant tape, and laid it on the ground near her. Not over her, not against her skin, beside her. Then he turned his back. "No one's looking," he said gently. "You can cover yourself, if you want." Behind him, silence. Then a sound, the soft drag of fabric through wet earth. A pause, and then the shallow, whispery rustle of someone moving for the first time in a very long time. He didn't turn. Instead, he moved to a broken wing panel half jammed into the soil nearby. It had enough overhang to shelter a fire, barely. He gathered dry brush from beneath the wreckage and flicked open a chemical flare with shaking fingers, nursing the flame into a low but steady burn. Orange light spilled into the crater like memory, soft, trembling, human. When he looked back, she was there, wrapped in his coat, hunched low but upright, her knees pulled against her chest beneath the fabric. Her arms were still crossed tightly, fists balled into her sides. Mud still streaked her face and legs, her yellow hair plastered to her neck. Steam curled faintly from her skin as the heat kissed it. She sat 3 meters away, watching him, not with curiosity, not even suspicion, just waiting. Niven reached into his satchel and pulled out a ration flask, nutrient paste, body warm from friction heat. He set it halfway between them and backed away again, palms open. "Eat," he said simply, slowly. "It's not much, but it'll help." She didn't move. The fire crackled. The rain hissed against metal. Somewhere deeper in the ruins, something creaked, the slow shifting of collapsed architecture. The ground here wasn't stable, and nightfall made it worse. But she was still the only thing he looked at. Finally, slowly, one of her hands slipped free from the coat. It was shaking. She reached for the flask, lifted it to her lips with both hands. The moment the paste touched her tongue, her body jerked just slightly. Her throat worked. She took a second sip, then a third, then stopped. Her eyes blinked fast. Her shoulders trembled, and without warning, a single tear spilled down her cheek, carving a clean line through the filth. She didn't make a sound, but her mouth opened just enough to show disbelief. Her lips moved slightly, as if remembering how. Niven didn't speak, didn't move. She kept drinking. When it was done, she held the flask like something fragile, as if letting go would break it. Or her. The fire danced between them, casting shadows on the broken hull, the mud-slick crater, the bones of machines that had once carried hope. She pulled the coat tighter. Niven settled in against the metal, folding his arms, cold to the core, but not moving closer. The crater was silent again, except for the rain. She didn't thank him, and he didn't need her to. He was the one who owed something. Not to her. To every woman no one had saved. Not this time. He wasn't leaving her here. Not this one. Niven didn't sleep that night. He sat half upright against a cracked hull panel, every muscle stiff from cold, listening to the slow hiss of steam as the fire gnawed through damp brush and chemical flares. Outside the shelter, the rain had finally eased into mist, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than the storm. The alien woman lay curled under his coat, just a few meters from him, still wrapped tight, still silent. The firelight caught in the damp ends of her yellow hair, now matted across her cheek like seaweed. She hadn't said a word, not when she ate, not when he offered warmth, not even as night descended and the cold began to bite again. She didn't cry, she didn't ask, but she didn't run. That alone sat heavy on his chest. She hadn't slept, not fully. Niven had watched her twitch at shadows, blink awake whenever the fire cracked too loud. Once around midnight, she shifted closer, only by a foot, maybe less, but it was the first motion she'd made without fear behind it. Her breathing, rough and ragged at first, had begun to slow with each hour. By morning, it almost sounded human. When the sun finally clawed its way through the haze, Niven stretched the stiffness out of his back, bones popping one by one. He glanced at her cautiously. She was still watching him. The same hollow eyes. But something had changed. Her knees were still pulled up beneath the coat, but her posture had eased. She wasn't coiled like before, and for the first time, her face wasn't hidden. The bruises stood out clearer now, along her collarbone, across her left jaw, blooming like deep purple flowers under skin the color of jade. Not a mark of clumsy impact. Surgical bruises, position restraints, pressure bands. He knew them, knew where they came from. She blinked slowly, eyes narrowing just a little as he moved. "Morning," he said softly, his voice gravel-thick with exhaustion. She didn't answer, didn't flinch. That was something. He reached into his satchel and pulled free another ration set. 2 soft nutrient cubes, a sealed protein paste vial, and a strip of water gel. It wasn't enough to restore her, but it was enough to keep her standing. If she could stand. He placed the food between them again, careful to keep his distance. "Eat slowly this time," he murmured, remembering the way she'd choked the night before. "It's dense, hard on the stomach." Her gaze dropped to the packet. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, with tentative fingers, she reached beneath the coat and lifted one of the cubes. Her grip faltered slightly, and Niven saw her hands more clearly now. Every nail was broken. The skin along her knuckles, raw, not from a fight, but from long periods of restraint, from trying to pull free of something that wouldn't let go. She bit into the cube. Too fast again. Her body jolted, a small gag catching in her throat. She brought her free hand up instinctively, no, defensively, as if someone might strike her for it. Her shoulders curled in. Niven didn't move, didn't reach out. Instead, he picked up the water strip and extended it slowly, holding it out in open hands. After a second's hesitation, she took it from him. Their fingers didn't touch, but the closeness was enough for her eyes to lock onto his face. She drank. The paste must have burned going down. He saw in the way her lips parted slightly, how her eyes fluttered, just for a moment, like warmth was a foreign thing her body didn't know how to receive anymore. Then, barely visible, a single tear slipped from the corner of her left eye. Not sobbing, not collapse, just one tear falling clean down a face that looked like it hadn't cried in years. She wiped it away with the back of her hand before it hit her chin. No shame, just silence. Water's still hot, Niven said, quieter now. If you want to wash. There's a basin near the wreck's lower deck. I set it up just before dark. She looked at him, eyes narrowing slightly, then looked away. He didn't expect a response. Niven busied himself near the fire, refueling it with whatever was dry enough to burn. His limbs move on instinct now, gather, stack, ignite, breathe. One hand hovered near his sidearm, not out of suspicion toward her, but because something in the surrounding terrain still felt wrong. Too quiet. No wildlife. No motion. Too many scavengers had passed through these zones in the last year. The wrong kind. The kind that sold living beings instead of salvaged tech. Raiders. Breeder hunters. Private crews with no allegiance to any law. This place wasn't safe, and it hadn't been for a long time. 20 minutes later, she returned. The coat was gone. In its place, she wore one of his old thermal shirts. Thin, soft, clean. The collar hung wide around her shoulders, sleeves rolled sloppily above her elbows. Damp from washing. Mud clung only to her ankles now. She looked, no, not stronger, but present. She didn't sit as far this time. She came closer to the fire, folded her legs neatly to one side, not facing him directly, still angled just enough to flee if she had to, but she didn't shrink from the warmth. He said nothing, just handed her another gel packet. Her hand took it without shaking this time. They ate in silence. He let her finish first. Then, with the last of the morning heat, he finally spoke. You know where you are? She looked up. Kareth 5 was written across the shattered bulkhead in faded white stenciling behind him. She could read it. He could tell. She nodded. Once. They left a lot of people here, he said, tone slow, deliberate. You weren't the first. You're not the last. Nothing. Still no voice. But she didn't deny it. I came here to find evidence. Years ago, he continued, to expose the programs. The black sites. I gathered proof. Names. Footage. I sent it to the tribunal. No blink. No sound. They discredited me. Said it was faked. Staged. My license was stripped. My name blacklisted. His mouth twisted. I stopped talking after that. She shifted slightly. Her shoulder brushed the edge of her sleeve, eyes dipping toward the fire. I didn't stop caring, he said. And this time, something flickered in her face. Not understanding. Not forgiveness. But something between the two. A recognition. As if she knew what it was to care in silence. To survive without anyone listening. He met her eyes. Held them. I'm not here to save you, he said. I'm just here. If you want me to be. That flicker didn't vanish. And for the first time since he'd found her, she didn't look away. They sat that way until the fire began to die again. Just breath, and the faint crackle of flame, and the cold wind rising from the crater below. But the silence between them didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. The second night came colder than the first. They'd moved camp just before dusk, up the ridge to a hollow between the wreck's splintered wings. Less exposed, better vantage. Niven had found half a solar blanket lodged in the debris, and between that and the reinforced thermal paneling, it was just enough to keep the wind off their backs. The crater still moaned when the wind slipped through, a low, cavernous sound that stirred instinct more than memory. Arivina hadn't spoken all day. She'd eaten, drunk, moved with more steadiness than the day before. She'd even helped gather kindling, wordlessly. When she passed him a bundle of sticks wrapped in the edge of her borrowed shirt, she didn't flinch when his fingers brushed hers. But still, no words. Niven hadn't pushed. He'd lived long enough around silence to know when it was survival, not defiance. Now, as the fire pulsed low and steady between them, he watched her in the soft orange light. She was curled beside the heat source, eyes open, knees drawn up again under a fresh thermal wrap. Her skin was cleaner, though still scratched and raw in places. Her yellow hair had dried into unruly ropes across her shoulders, catching light like old brass. She watched the flames, not him. He wanted to say something, anything, but it was her voice that came first. A whisper, barely audible, rough and strange on her tongue. "You don't look like them." The sound struck harder than any sudden movement could have. Niven froze. He turned his head slowly toward her. She wasn't looking at him, but the words were unmistakably directed his way. Her voice had a slight hiss to it, a softness at the end of each consonant, like she was still remembering how to shape them. He kept his tone quiet, neutral. "No, I don't." "They wore white," she added, after a long pause. "Smelled like bleach. Hands too clean." Her throat worked on the word clean, like it was something vile. Niven's chest tightened. "I wore the coat of a lab once," he admitted. "Not like them, but I was close. Close enough to see it." "Did you touch them?" The question was sharp. Not aggressive, not angry, but pointed. Niven looked back into the fire. "I touched a screen. I signed a report. I called what they did unethical while they called it efficient." She didn't respond immediately. Then quietly, "And now?" He glanced at her. This time, she met his eyes. "Now," he said, "I break things. Dig through dead metal. Leave graves marked when I find them." Her expression didn't change, but her breathing did. Slower, calmer. She shifted slightly under the wrap, adjusting her posture, and Niven noticed something else. Her knees had stopped trembling. "You don't ask," she said. His brows rose. "Ask what?" "My name. What they did to me. Why I was naked in the mud." Niven held her gaze. "I figured if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Not to confirm, just to acknowledge. Another silence settled between them, but it was a different kind now. Not distance, not fear, just quiet. Necessary, like breath after strain. Niven stirred the fire, breaking the silence gently. "I was thinking of checking the lower ridge tomorrow. There's a downed relay tower. Might still have solar cells intact." Arivina's head tilted slightly. "Dangerous? Some erosion. One of the trails collapsed last winter. But I'll mark the safe paths." Her mouth twitched. Almost a smirk, but not quite. Still talking like a medic. He chuckled under his breath. "I used to warn patients about everything. Side effects, risks, potential trauma. And now I warn ghosts." For a moment, the fire snapped loud between them. Then she shifted again, this time toward him, slowly, purposefully. Her blanket dragged along the dirt, catching in ash. She didn't touch him, but she sat close enough that he could feel her warmth bleeding through the thin air between them. Close enough to hear her breathe. She stared into the flames for a long while, then spoke again. "I wasn't supposed to survive." He stayed still. "I overheard them," she continued, voice low, each word slower than the last. "One said I'd reached endpoint metrics. Another said the tags were stale. That no viable cells remained." Niven's stomach turned. "They stopped feeding me," she added. "Didn't even turn off the lights. Just left." Her hands were balled into the edge of the wrap now, knuckles white. But something broke. Power surge. Maybe gravity fault. I don't know. One day the straps released. Door opened. She paused, then whispered. I crawled. I couldn't walk. He looked at her carefully, not moving. "You made it all the way from the pod to the crater?" She nodded once. "Took days, I think. Maybe more. How did you know this place wasn't safe?" She looked at him, and this time, the expression wasn't blank. It was bitter, sharp. "I didn't. I just didn't want to die there. Not in there. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Niven lowered his head. I'm sorry. Arivina didn't nod, didn't thank him. Instead, she leaned closer, just enough that her shoulder brushed his. A deliberate touch. Not by accident. She didn't flinch, and neither did he. They sat like that for a long time, two warm bodies in a dying world, with nothing but fire and breath between them. When her head finally rested lightly against his upper arm, he didn't speak. He just adjusted his weight so she could stay there without slipping. And for the first time in years, Niven closed his eyes with someone beside him and didn't feel like he was failing them. The fire burned low but not out, and neither were they. The fire had burned low by the time Niven stirred, his body aching from the cold stone beneath him. Dawn crept into the shelter, casting soft amber light across the dust-coated walls. Beside him, Arivina was already awake, seated cross-legged near the entrance, her back straight, eyes watching the shifting sky beyond the ridge. She'd been quiet all morning. Not tense, just distant. Like her thoughts had drifted into territory she hadn't walked in years. Niven didn't speak. He didn't need to. Something in her posture told him this day wasn't one for conversation. They shared a silent breakfast. Dried root slices soaked in boiled water, bitter but filling. She didn't flinch when he passed her the cup. She didn't avoid his gaze. But she wasn't present either, not entirely. When the sun reached its first peak, they moved together toward the south ridge, where a crumpled medevac pod lay half swallowed by time and moss. Niven had spotted the wreck 3 days earlier, but hadn't approached it. Something about the angles, the silence it radiated, had made him hesitate. Arivina didn't. She stepped inside first. The air within was stale, dense with a scent he hadn't smelled in years. Old coolant, rust, and something deeper beneath it. A scent he would always associate with procedure rooms. Tables with restraints. Lights that never dimmed. She didn't hesitate. Her steps were silent, deliberate, and sure. Her hand reached out and brushed dust off a console screen. It flickered, then came to life. Soft blue light filled the dark. A medical prompt blinked in the center of the screen, archival data present. Secure access. Niven approached slowly. Looks like a local system. Not wiped, Arivina murmured. Her voice was calm, but her eyes had gone sharp. She tapped the interface, fingers precise. The screen responded instantly. Rows of alphanumeric tags filled the display. Subject IDs, medical designations, experiment phases. Then she stopped. In 231. She touched the line, and the file expanded. There was no picture, just a silhouette icon, generic and gray. A string of biological data. Hormonal markers. Womb cycles. Implantation success rates. Beneath that, a short log note. Status, unviable. Reclassified. Discontinued. She didn't move. Niven stood behind her, not speaking. Arivina stared at the words, as if trying to convince herself they weren't hers. But they were. She had seen them before. A memory surfaced, not a vivid flash, but a texture. Cold against her spine. Straps tightening. A voice, mechanical and devoid of inflection, declaring her non-productive. After that, silence. The light stayed on, but no one came back. That word, discontinued, had been spoken over her as if she wasn't there. She didn't cry, didn't tremble, but her hand slowly rose to the base of her throat. She rubbed it gently, as if trying to scrub something away that had never really been visible. I used to think I imagined it, she said quietly, that no one could be so efficient with their cruelty. Niven's voice was soft. You didn't imagine it. No, she replied. I lived it. Her fingers hovered over the console again. The name field was editable, just a ghosted line meant for medical staff to input an identifier. She tapped into it, typed slowly, Arivina. Then she pressed enter. The console accepted it. For the first time, the system recognized her name. She stepped back and let the screen fade. Outside, the wind picked up. Niven followed her out, watching her shoulders rise and fall. She didn't look at him, not yet. Her hands were clenched, jaw tight. It's strange, she said finally. I kept thinking I would feel something when I saw that file. Rage, grief, closure. "And what do you feel?" he asked. "Weight, like carrying a body that was once mine." He didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't cheapen the moment. They walked until they found a clearing just above the ridge. A fallen shuttle wing had collapsed into a sort of bench. She sat on it, pulling her knees to her chest. "I was a navigation apprentice," she said after a long silence. "Before all of it. Before the war. I'd just gotten my crew insignia when our convoy was taken." Niven turned to face her, seated nearby, but not too close. "They boarded us without firing. No warning. My crewmates were sedated before they could shout. I remember being held down by someone with soft hands. They didn't even speak to me. Just injected, tagged, and loaded." She breathed slowly, deliberately. "They kept us separate. I never knew how many others there were. You only ever saw the ones that didn't scream." She laughed once, dry, without amusement. "You learn not to scream." Niven didn't ask how long she'd been held. He didn't need to. "They gave me synthetic hormones," she continued. "They tracked everything. When I stopped being viable, they stripped the data, downgraded my status, and dumped me here. Not as punishment, just protocol." She turned her head and finally looked at him. "I used to believe I died there." "You didn't." "I know. But the girl who flew ships and memorized star routes? She did. That was their first success." She stood, stretching her legs, her posture stiff. "But I want to fly again. That part of me, I want it back." Niven rose beside her. "You will," he said, "and not in a cell. Not for anyone else." She stared at him. Then, quietly, "Why do you still care? After everything you lost?" He didn't hesitate. "Because if I stop, I'll become the system I tried to destroy." Arivina stepped closer, the wind curling her hair around her face. "You're not like them." "I used to be close," he said. "I looked the other way too many times. Said not my department too often." Her fingers brushed his hand, not holding, just touching barely. "But you stopped," she said. "You saw what they didn't. You see me." He didn't pull away. She looked up at him, eyes steady. "Do you still want to leave this place?" "I want to leave it with you." Arivina nodded. "Then I'll help you rebuild the ship. I remember systems, navigation, fuel sequencing." He smiled softly. "I know." Together, they returned to camp. And as they walked side by side beneath a wide, cloudless sky, the word discontinued had never felt farther away. She was Arivina now, and no one would erase her again. The wind rolled in low across the valley, dry and rust-scented. It carried with it the quiet sigh of heat settling into old metal. Above, the sun hovered just beyond the broken ridge line, staining the cliff walls in burnt orange. Arivina crouched by the skeletal remains of a support drone, her fingers wrapped around the cooling core she'd pried free minutes earlier. Her hands were steady, her breaths controlled. She barely noticed the weight of the core or the sweat beading along her jaw. Niven watched from a distance, seated on a collapsed panel. He'd spent the last hour stripping the usable fiber from a communications array. She hadn't asked for help, and he hadn't offered. Not out of distance, but out of respect. They worked well in silence. It had become a rhythm in the past few days: salvage in the mornings, repairs in the afternoon, fire and shelter maintenance by dusk. No formal discussions. No debates over what to do next. They moved as if guided by some mutual instinct to build something from the wreckage, not only of machines, but of themselves. And yet, something was shifting. It wasn't the work, not the camp. It was her. Arivina had changed. Niven had seen at the moment they left the medevac wreck 2 days ago. She no longer hesitated before walking ahead. She no longer recoiled from noise, or light, or the shape of her own shadow in the dirt. When she slept, her body no longer curled inward in defense. When she woke, she stretched without flinching. But it wasn't just survival anymore. It was intention. Still, something remained tightly wound beneath the surface. A knot of tension that hadn't loosened, no matter how much warmth passed between them. Niven felt it most when she avoided his eyes just a little too long, or when she smiled only halfway. Like a part of her didn't trust that peace could last. Like she was waiting for it to be taken from her. That afternoon, they found the old console buried in the dirt near the generator ruins. It was a secondary backup unit, shielded enough to remain intact. Niven dug it out, dusted off the casing, and ran diagnostics. It still worked. Arivina didn't speak as he connected it to his salvage battery. Her expression was unreadable. "This could give us interface access to the shuttle core," he said. She gave a single nod, but her mouth was tight. When the console finished booting, a display flickered to life. System maps, terrain logs, scattered ping data. Useless now mostly. But at the center of the screen, one icon blinked softly. Outbound beacon, ready for broadcast. Arivina's jaw clenched. "It's not active," Niven said. "Only local range. But it could be." He hesitated. "Yes." She turned away, suddenly walking toward the far edge of the ridge. Her steps were too sharp. She stopped just before the cliff drop, arms crossed over her chest, spine rigid. Niven didn't follow immediately. He closed the console lid, silenced the beacon prompt, and stood slowly. When he reached her, she didn't turn. "It's still in me," she said quietly. "That reflex. When I see an exit, I expect a cage." He stood beside her, letting the wind push through the silence. "I thought I wanted freedom," she continued. "But now that it's here, I don't know what to do with it. I can walk anywhere. Speak. Touch. Choose. And all I can think is, what if it disappears again?" Her voice wasn't shaking, but carried weight. "I never got to leave before," she said. "They just stopped showing up. One day I was trash. Bio-waste. Nothing changed about me. They just changed how they looked at me." Niven didn't answer. He couldn't fix what had been done to her. But he could listen. "I'm afraid of wanting things," Arivina whispered. "Afraid that if I ask for something, it'll be used against me. That someone will say yes just to watch me break when they take it away." She turned to him then, eyes clear, shoulders square. "I want to choose," she said, "but I don't know how to want." He met her gaze, steady, then start small. She held his stare for a long moment, then said, "I want to stay. With you. Here. For now." He nodded once. "That's enough." Later, as the light shifted and the wind died down, they returned to camp. Neither of them said much. Not because there was tension, but because the silence had become a kind of language between them. It was safe, honest. They rebuilt the tarp shelter, reinforced the frame, secured the fire pit. Night was falling, and with it, the soft hush of desert cold. Inside the shelter, Niven laid out the padded blankets. Arivina sat across from him, sipping from a shared flask of steeped moss water. Her eyes followed him as he moved, not just watching, but studying, not suspicious, curious. When he sat beside her, she didn't shift away. Her voice came softly. "Do you still think about before?" "Sometimes," he said, "but less and less." "Do you think it will come back?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "I think memory is like gravity. It doesn't go away. You just learn to walk with it." Arivina turned her body toward him, legs crossed beneath her. Her hand moved slowly, resting on the mat beside his. Not touching, but close. "I don't want to remember," she said. "Not always. Not all of it. You don't have to. But I want something to replace it. Something stronger." He looked down at their hands, at the thin space between them. And then, deliberately, he reached out and closed the distance. Their fingers met. Not clasped, just resting together. Arivina's breath hitched. Her other hand rose slowly and pressed against his chest, over his heart. Her touch was light. Testing. "I feel safe," she said, "and that terrifies me." He leaned closer, not to overwhelm her, but to show her that the closeness was hers to define. "It terrifies me too," he said. Then, without urgency, he tilted his head forward and let their foreheads touch. The contact was soft. No tension, no demand, just presence. Her hand tightened slightly against his chest. He kissed her once. Gentle. A question, not a statement. She answered by leaning into it. It wasn't passion. It wasn't desperation. It was quiet, tender, fully awake. When they parted, she didn't speak, but her lips brushed the edge of his jaw as she settled against him. And for the first time since she'd spoken her name aloud, Arivina let herself rest in someone's arms without bracing for impact. She slept with her hand still in his. Not because she had to, but because she chose to. The mornings were quieter now. Not from a lack of sound. Birds still skimmed across the valley, the wind still tugged at the loose edges of the tarp roof, but because silence had become something they shared. Not avoidance. Not the aftertaste of fear. It was comfort. Arivina sat at the edge of the bluff, her knees drawn up, the early sun warming her skin. The air was crisp, dry, clean. Below, the ravine shimmered with heat mirages, already preparing to rise. She watched the ripples shift and fade, her mind still. Behind her, Niven was tending the fire. The sound of kindling cracking came in steady rhythms. Familiar now, part of the space between them. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. She could feel him. It was a quiet miracle, this new awareness. Not one she spoke of, but carried in small ways. How her shoulders stayed relaxed when he stood behind her. How her fingers no longer curled into fists when he touched her hand in passing. How her breath no longer paused when he leaned close to speak. Today, something inside her felt still. Not numb. Not frozen. Still. It was the first time she didn't wake to fragments of her old life clawing at the edges of sleep. No metal walls. No echoing boots. No mechanical hums behind her eyes. Just wind. Warmth. A body near hers that never asked for more than she could give. She stood and stretched slowly, letting the light touch her limbs. Her bare feet dug into the moss-soft soil. She didn't hide her body from the sun anymore. Not from him either. Niven looked up when she approached. His face was shadowed by the rising light, eyes squinting beneath his brow. He handed her a warm flask without a word. She drank, passed it back. Storm systems holding south, he said. We'll get another quiet night. Arivina nodded. We should sleep outside. He tilted his head. No shelter. She met his gaze. No walls. A beat of silence. Then, okay. By early evening, they'd packed the essentials into a small cache beneath the overhang and laid a blanket on the open stone near the fire pit. The ridge faced the stars, unobstructed, with no canopy, no wreckage, no memory looming above them. As night fell, the sky opened in full. Not a dome, not a prison, an expanse. They lay side by side, their backs to the warm stone, bodies barely touching. Arivina's eyes traced the constellations she no longer remembered the names of. Niven's hand rested palm up beside hers, open, waiting. She didn't take it immediately, but she knew it was there. I used to believe the stars were silent, she said finally, her voice low. But now I think we were just listening wrong. Niven glanced over. They're not silent, she added. They're patient. She turned her head and looked at him. In the starlight, his face looked older. Worn, not tired. Etched with the kind of lines people only earn from watching too much happen too fast. He didn't speak, but his gaze didn't waver. She reached over, rested her fingers against his chest again, just as she had nights before. His heartbeat was steady. Familiar now. Her anchor. Her proof. She felt something tighten in her throat. Not fear. Want. Real. Unfiltered. Not the want to be held, or protected, or kept, but the want to be known. Fully. As she was now. Slowly. She leaned over, her fingers brushing the edge of his jaw. He didn't move. Didn't flinch. He only watched. Her mouth touched his. Soft. Focused. It was not a kiss made of longing or desperation. It was a decision. A claiming, not of him, but of herself. Her agency. Her present. Her right to feel something without asking permission. He responded in kind, gently, attentively. His hands stayed at his sides until she guided one to her back. No urgency. No escalation. Just presence. She pulled away slightly, their foreheads resting together. I'm not broken, she whispered, even if I sometimes feel like I am. Niven's breath warmed the space between them. No, he said, you're not. Arivina exhaled. I don't want to carry the weight of what they did into what we are. You don't have to, he said. We're not made of what hurt us. She closed her eyes. Then let me begin again. Right here. You already have. They lay back down, bodies turning inward. This time, when she curled into him, it wasn't for safety. It was for closeness. Her arm rested across his chest. His breath matched hers. When she ran her fingers down the line of his ribs, he didn't tense. When he kissed the edge of her brow, she smiled without turning away. It wasn't about what came next. It was about this night, this open sky, this body beside hers that didn't ask for anything she wasn't ready to give. Hours passed without urgency. Their movements were slow, exploratory. When they touched, it was with awe, not hunger, not conquest. When he undressed her, it was her hands guiding his. When she pressed her mouth to his collarbone, it was not for seduction, it was to listen to the hum of his body beneath hers. Warm, living, real. Their connection that night was not a climax. It was a beginning. Afterward, they stayed curled together beneath a blanket pulled lazily over their hips. Arivina rested with her ear to his chest, eyes closed, fingers absently tracing the curve of his wrist. "I'm not afraid of morning anymore," she said. Niven kissed her temple. "Neither am I." The fire had burned low again, casting long shadows over the bluff. The stars blinked, steady and infinite, above them. And in that space between the past and what could come next, they existed. Not hiding, not healing, just whole, together. The wind carried the smell of warmed rock and distant ash blossoms. It swept softly through the half-open doorway, rustling the cloth that hung there like a curtain. Morning had broken slowly, light falling across the floor in golden slats. The kind of light that made everything feel gentle, even the past. Arivina stirred beneath the blanket, eyes blinking open with no trace of panic. No need to orient herself. The space around her was familiar, safe. Her breathing stayed calm. The blanket was warm. The man beside her even warmer. Niven's arm was still wrapped loosely around her waist. His breath stirred the back of her shoulder with each exhale. His hand, calloused but steady, rested against her ribs, not gripping, not holding. Just there. She stayed still for a while, listening, feeling. This was the first place she'd ever woken up more than once and called her own. Not a cell, not a clinic, not a hidden crawl space scavenged in terror. A place they had built together from reclaimed parts and quiet hours. A place with no locks. She turned slowly to face him. Niven was still asleep, his expression more open in rest than it ever was while awake. A fine scar traced his jawline, old and almost faded. His lips were parted slightly, breath deep and even. She lifted her hand and touched the edge of his hairline, brushed a few strands back. He didn't wake, but she saw the corners of his mouth twitch faintly. He always knew when she was close. It had been 17 days since she'd spoken the words, "I want to stay." They hadn't talked about forever. They didn't need to. They lived it instead. It was in the way he always left the warm water for her first. The way she folded his shirts and placed them at the edge of the bed, even when he told her not to worry. The way they planned nothing unless it needed to be done. And how that gave them both a kind of freedom neither had ever known. Arivina slipped from the bed, careful not to disturb him. Her body was sore, but not in ways that brought fear. The soreness was earned through movement, repair, intimacy, repetition, through living. She wrapped herself in one of his loose shirts and stepped barefoot onto the stone floor. The breeze outside was clean. The valley spread wide below, dotted with thin grasses and low shrubs. Their power array blinked steadily from its new mount on the ridge. The antenna rotated gently on its hinge, tracking the slow orbit of a satellite far above. Everything was holding. She started tea. Inside, she heard him sit up. Not rushed. No panic. Just the familiar sound of him rubbing the back of his neck, exhaling through his nose. A few minutes later, he joined her on the ledge. Shirtless, boots half-laced, cup in hand. "Something smells good," he said. "It's the herbs from the east slope," she replied. "You said they taste like mint." "They do," he agreed, sipping. "Mint with a hint of dirt." She smiled faintly, watching the horizon. "Earthy." He settled beside her, legs stretched out in front. For a while, neither spoke. Then he said, "I found a flight chart in one of the crates yesterday. Still intact. Outdated, but usable." She turned her head. "You thinking of moving?" Not yet, he said, just knowing the sky again. It felt good to look. Arivina nodded. We'll go when we're ready. I know. She reached over, took his hand, and traced a line along the side of his palm. Her voice was soft. I don't want to run. I just want to choose. You are. A long silence passed. Then she asked, do you miss anyone? His brow furrowed slightly. I used to, he said. Faces. Voices. People who mattered. But now, it's like they're still with me in the things I've done since. And the ones you couldn't save? He didn't flinch, just let out a slow breath. I remember them, but they don't haunt me the way they used to. Why not? He looked at her. Because I think they'd rather I live. She nodded. I used to think I didn't deserve peace. That surviving men I owed something. That I had to prove I was worth what I still had. And now, she met his gaze. Now I think being alive is enough. He reached out and brushed her hair back. His thumb rested just above her temple, the touch feather-light. You are enough. They didn't kiss then. They didn't need to. Later, they repaired the water pump together. She held the tubing while he fitted the valve. They worked in easy rhythm, their movements fluid, words few. When the system hissed to life again, she leaned back on her heels and wiped her brow. Still think I don't know mechanics? She teased. I never said that, Niven said. I just didn't realize you could outwork me. I wasn't trying. That's worse. She laughed. It felt like a song without melody. And for the first time, she didn't hold back the sound. It echoed across the ridge, light and full. He reached over and kissed her shoulder. Not passion, not habit, just affection, simple and unguarded. That night, they lay beside the fire again, watching the constellations return. The wind shifted northward, cooler, whispering of coming rains. She pulled the blanket higher around them. Her head rested against his chest. Their fingers were intertwined. Niven, she murmured. Yeah, I want a ship. He smiled. Good, because we have parts for about half of one. She chuckled. And I want to name it. Of course. There was a pause. Then, silence breaker. He glanced down at her. You sure? She nodded against him. That's what we've done. Broke the silence. Made something new. He kissed the top of her head. Then that's what it'll be. Arivina closed her eyes. Not because she needed to escape the world, but because for the first time, she wanted to wake up in it. With him, with herself, with a name that had meaning, with a future no one could take, and with love, real love, not spoken in fear, not begged in the dark, but built, choice by choice, day by day, and that would be enough. Always, the stars looked different from the cockpit, not because they had changed, but because she had. Arivina leaned forward in the pilot's chair, her bare feet propped against the console, a loose shirt draped across her shoulders, sleeves rolled to the elbow. The hum of the engine behind her was soft, steady, alive. The ship responded to every slight adjustment of her hand with the ease of muscle memory, as if it recognized her, as if it had been waiting. Below them, Kareth, 5 was shrinking into shadow, its shattered valleys and sun-bleached wreckage folding into haze. She didn't feel the ache of leaving it. She didn't feel fear. She felt free. Behind her, Niven stepped into the cockpit, 2 mugs in hand. He was shirtless, still warm from their bed, hair slightly disheveled from sleep. He pressed one cup in her hand and leaned over her shoulder, resting his chin there. Still charting, he murmured, lips brushing her ear. Not charting, she said, sipping. Watching. He glanced at the display. Everything looked good. She tilted her head back into him. Perfect. The ship, they discovered, had been buried deep in the old Kareth Canyon Pass. A half-buried exfil transport, long forgotten, its beacon long dead. It had taken them a week to dig out the hull, another 3 to replace enough of the drive coils to make it space-worthy. The systems were primitive, but clean, honest, nothing hidden, just metal and possibility. They called her Silence Breaker, a name born in firelight, whispered between them as they held hands and looked at the stars. A name that meant not escape, but voice. Not flight, but choice. You ready to push her a little? Niven asked, trailing his hand along her shoulder. See what she can do. She smirked. We're already flying. Flying steady, he said. Not fast. She turned the chair slightly. What's the rush? His eyes found hers. And then he kissed her. Slow, thorough, familiar. The kind of kiss built from trust, not tension. From choosing the same person again and again, even when there's no fire to run from. Arivina slid her fingers into his hair, pulling him closer, deepening it. Her lips moved over his with precision and ease, not needy, just certain. When he pulled back, slightly breathless, she smiled against his mouth. Still scared of freedom? He asked, voice low. She kissed the corner of his mouth, then his jaw, then the hollow beneath his throat. No, she whispered, not when I have somewhere to land. He took her hand and guided her up from the chair. They moved together like orbit and gravity, natural, magnetic. Their bodies met in the soft corridor just behind the cockpit, where a small sleeping berth had been lined with the blankets they once shared on stone. Here, skin met skin, not out of desperation, but because touch had become home. He pressed his forehead to hers as their fingers traced familiar lines, slow, deliberate. You feel like sunlight, she murmured. You feel like waking up, he whispered. And they kissed again, longer, deeper. Their mouths moved with the comfort of knowing there was no need to rush. No walls, no watchers, just heat and rhythm and breath shared in the space between stars. Later, they lay tangled together beneath the viewports, watching light shift through the ship as they passed through the upper ion layer. The stars blinked against the hull in soft glints. Arivina rested her head on his chest, their bodies bare beneath a loose sheet. Niven's fingers traced idle lines along her spine. You know, he murmured, I think this is what peace feels like. She didn't answer at first. She just smiled, lips against his skin. Then, let's not name it. Why not? Because naming it makes it sound like it can end. He nodded slowly and pulled her closer. The ship flew on, quiet and steady. Not running, not chasing, just moving forward together.